Good afternoon, everyone. We are the Amazing Group and we are going to discuss the mapping intangible cultural heritage. So, what we'll discuss? First, what is intangible cultural heritage? Characteristics, the domains, matrix for mapping significant intangible cultural heritage, significance and safeguarding, and lastly, example of mapping intangible cultural heritage. So, what is intangible cultural heritage? UNESCO, or the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, defines intangible cultural heritage as the practices, representations, expressions, as well as the knowledge and skills including instruments, objects, artifacts, cultural spaces that most of the communities, groups, and in some cases, individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage, which simply means that we share cultural expressions that have been passed from one generation to another, which evolve in response to their environments and contribute to giving us a sense of identity and continuity. So, for it to be kept alive, it must remain relevant to a culture and be regularly practiced and learned within communities and between generations. Communities and groups who practice these traditions and customs everywhere in the world have their own systems for transmitting their knowledge and skills, usually dependent or on word of mouth rather than written text. So, kasagaran sa mga lugar nga naay tradisyon nga ginasunod, wala sila nag-base sa mga written text or kanang nasa mga libro baron or unsa na siya. Nag-base sila through their experience or sa ilang nasugdan sa una sa ilang mga katigulangan unsa ilang gisunod nga baluhaton or mga practices like pareha sa among tradisyon karon na among gisunod. Wala mi gibasihan nga suwat nga mao ni among buhaton nga sa Londonon mani wala kana nga among tradisyon nasunod na namo siya because mo nay naandan or nasugdan sa among mga ancestors sa mother side ako yang lolohan ana. So intangible cultural heritage does not only represent inherited traditions from the past, but also contemporary rural and urban practices in which diverse cultural groups take part. Furthermore, intangible cultural heritage is not a cultural manifestation itself, but rather the wealth of knowledge and skills that is transmitted through it from one generation to the next.
Characteristics of intangible cultural heritage. The main component concept of ICH is its being intangible. According to various dictionaries, intangible means capable of being perceived by the sense of touch, as in corporeal or immaterial, not made of physical substance, and from the Latin infinitive, tangere or to touch. So, intangible means dili makita or impossible to touch, nya no physical existence. In contrast to tangible cultural heritage, which is substantially real or immaterial or corporeal, ICH are inanimate concepts that cannot be touched, such as language, thoughts, beliefs, processes, values, systems, patterns, mental and ideational structures, technology, procedures, ways, modes, and the like. However, ICH most of the time employs material and physical things as part of its processes and actual implementation. Like for example, a shamanic ritual in itself and when actuated is an abstract and conceptual system of procedures, but the ritualist, healer, or a shaman uses a lot of ritual instruments or accessories like bells, candles, leaves, food, and etc. So, ang ritualist, healer, or a shaman, nag-include sila or nag-employ og mga material or physical objects nga pwede nilang gamiton sa process or sa pag-implement ana nga ritual or culture. UNESCO and other heritage experts like Dr. Peralta describe or characterize intangible cultural heritage as cultural properties that are ephemeral, So when we say ephemeral, it means that it only lasts for a very short time. Just like culture in general, intangible heritage is constantly changing and evolving and being enriched by each new generation. Many expressions and manifestations of intangible cultural heritage are under threat, endangered by globalization, and also by lack of support, appreciation, and understanding. Next is the heritable, transmitted from one generation to generation. So the importance of intangible cultural heritage is not the cultural manifestation itself, but rather the wealth of knowledge and skills that is transmitted through it from one generation to the next. And it is constantly created by communities and groups in response to their environment, their interaction with nature, their history, thus promoting respect for cultural diversity and human creativity. So the pattern of convergence at present shows groups exhibiting a generalized form of culture hardly indistinguishable from one another, like the cultures of Cordillera, the Lumads, and the Muslim groups in Mindanao, the lowland Christianized communities in central and southern Luzon and in central Visayas region. These differentiated groupings are based on their ethno-linguistic groups or communities distinct from one each other due to the language, geography, and history. Each grouping has some common features in language, rites of passage, components of material culture, ideologies, and customs. In response to their environment, their interaction with nature, their history, individual and communal, sensitive to change, and have a great range of variance. For example, Puno. It is a tagging ritual in the Philippines where it is participated in by the village folk from three communities in Hongduan, Ifugao. It is performed at the confluence of Hapao River and a tributary as the final ritual after a rice harvest. Its consummation brings to a close an agricultural cycle and signals the beginning of a new one. Cultural heritage is highly variable since it is the individual who practices and benefits from the legacy. It is received according to the manner of the receiver, depending on its personality factors. This results in variance among individuals. Intangible cultural heritage examples like the adobo, the comedia, the courtship, customs, the fiesta, the poetic jaws, the Holy Week rites, all have distinct common features within each type, but have specific variation from region to region or even province to province. So, cultural heritage, mauni siya ang atong nakuha or nadawat gikan sa past and experience at the present and transmit to future generations. And it implies a shared bond and a belonging to a community.
Now let's move on to the domains of the intangible cultural heritage. UNESCO 2003 Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage proposed 5 broad domains in which intangible cultural heritage is manifested. First domain is oral traditions and expressions, including language as a vehicle of the intangible cultural heritage. Second, performing arts. Third, social practices, rituals and festive events. Fourth, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe. And lastly, traditional craftsmanship. The first domain is oral traditions and expressions, including language as a vehicle of the intangible cultural heritage. The oral traditions and expressions domain encompasses an enormous variety of spoken forms, including proverbs, riddles, tales, nursery rhymes, legends, myths, epic songs, dramatic performances, and more. Some examples for the main one from different regions of our country includes origin myths and epics of the Cordillera and the Ilocos peoples, Mindanao epics like Darangen, Agyo, Ulahingan, and etc. Storytelling forms like the Bayok of the Marinos, Panay Bukidnon epics like Hinilawod, folktales, legends, riddles of Luzon and the Visayas, poetic jokes like Balitaw and Karagatan, poetic debates like Balagtasan and Balak, Loas and Bordon of Panao and Negros, and languages, local idioms, sayings, and folk expression. The second domain is called performing arts. This can include music, dance and theater, pantomime songs, and other forms of artistic expression that are passed down from generation to generation. Some examples of performing arts include instrumental music. Rondalia, in Mindanao they have Kulintangan, and for Cordillera they have Gangsa Ensemble. For vocal music, Kalinga, Ulalim, Kundiman, lullabies, farming, and fishing songs. For dances, Kuradang and Jotas of the Visayas, war and wedding dances of the Cordillera people and the Mindanao Lumads, the Batangas Subli, traditional drama, Komedia or Moro-Moro or Linambay, Sinakulo, Bodabil, and many more. The third domain is called social practices, rituals, and festive. These are the activities that structure the lives of communities and are shared by members. For example, initiation rites, burial ceremonies, seasonal carnivals, and harvest celebration. Some examples for the main three in the Philippines include fiestas, Holy Week, paraliturgical rites, and folk customs in the Catholic regions. Life cycle rituals like rites of passage to adolescence, wedding, death, and many more. The fourth domain is called knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe. This refers to know-how and skills that communities have developed by interacting with their natural environments and may be expressed through language, memories, spiritualities, or worldviews. Traditional methods of architecture, agriculture, cattle breeding, and cuisine are among the related elements. Some examples for the main four in the Philippines includes Blaan Sacred Mountains in Davao del Sur, Sukdang Shamans of Inabanga, Bohol, Luya-Luya Panulong Sulong, Pagbungad of Sigma Capis, Cosmology Beliefs of the Hanunuo Mangyan, and Taot Bato, Jama Mapon Constellations, belief in supernatural worlds, spirits, and creatures of various ethno-linguistic groups, beliefs related to traditional livelihoods such as farming and fishing, local community knowledge on predicting weather phenomena. The fifth domain is called traditional craftsmanship. This may sound tangible, but it really refers to the skills and knowledge involved in craftsmanship than the products themselves. Examples include pottery, woodwork, jewelry and precious stones, embroidery, carpet weaving, musical instrument production, weaving, and fabric production. Some examples for the main five in the Philippines includes mat weaving in Basay Samar, basket weaving in Antiquera and Kabila, Bohol, textile weaving in Abel in Luzon, Patajong and Hablon in the Visayas, and Abakaikat in Mindanao. Sculptures, jewelry, and carvings on silver, bronze, brass, and wood.
Matrix for mapping significant intangible cultural heritage resources. Matrix mapping has 4 categories, and these are the domain, types, data gathering tools, and sources. In domain, we have the oral traditions and expressions, performing arts, social practices, rituals and festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, and last, traditions, craftsmanship. In types, this includes the different types of enactment depends on domain. Examples are poems, chants, and etc. In gathering, it is a key in format interviews focuses on group discussion, demonstrations, and review of the related research literature. While in sources, these are the people who are involved or the one to perform on these are the elders, artists, cultural workers, cultural groups, and cultural NGOs.
Next, we have the significance and safeguarding of the intangible cultural heritage. Cultural mapping involves the representation of landscapes in 2 or 3 dimensions from the perspectives of indigenous and local peoples. It is an important tool for UNESCO in its efforts to help member states and civil society create platforms for cultural dialogues and increase awareness of cultural diversity as a resource for peace building, good governance, fighting poverty, adaptation to climate change, and maintaining sustainable management and use of natural resources. Clearly, cultural mapping projects allow indigenous cultures to express themselves in their full territorial context. In particular, participatory cultural mapping can strengthen the ability of communities to manage their cultural heritage and knowledge while also encouraging respect and understanding from dominant groups. Cultural mapping of different cultural heritage plays a vital role in the preservation of this intangible cultural heritage. These serve as a way for the local and indigenous people to boast their community pride in accordance to traditions, beliefs of their people. This intangible cultural heritage is an important factor in maintaining cultural diversity in the face of growing globalization. An understanding of this intangible cultural heritage of different communities helps with intercultural dialogue and conversations, as well as encourages mutual respect on the differences of the way people live their lives. Next is the safeguarding of cultural resources that refers to the measures aimed at ensuring the viability of the intangible cultural heritage. It includes the identification, documentation, research preservation, protection, promotion, enhancement, and transmission, particularly through formal and non-formal education, as well as the revitalization of the various aspects of such heritage. Nowadays, people tend to forget that cultures must be preserved to pass it through other generations. That is why safeguarding these cultural resources must be taken into account with. We local people have the responsibility to preserve and protect this culture. We can even do documentations in order for it to be marginalized in many aspects in a wider audience or mass. The Filipinos will be presented as creators, UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding Innovators, and bearers of collective of the intangible cultural heritage, and the wisdom rather than imitators and passive UNESCO Convention on the Protection Consumers. In this way, we call attention and promotion of the diversity of cultural to our intrinsic dignity and work and expressions, enhance our self-respect, as a way of dignifying our people as significant, which is the Convention for the Safeguarding of Direction in Healing and Unifying Nation, the Intangible Cultural Heritage of 2003. The Convention for the Safeguarding of Direction in Healing and Unifying a Nation, the Intangible Cultural Heritage 2003, has a substantial implications for indigenous peoples around the planet in that it takes account into their practices, landscapes, and cultural heritage from their own perspective and emphasizing their role in managing increasing awareness that some of the cultural and natural resources needed. Convention for the Safeguarding of this Intangible Cultural Heritage will have its impact to the people around the planet, their practices, landscapes, beliefs, and traditions. This process increases the awareness with regards to preservation of cultural heritage, wherein we have the ability to protect and act in accordance to its preservation. We just need to value this cultural heritage because it is one of our country's pride among other countries.
So here are the examples of intangible cultural heritage. Mapping of significant intangible cultural heritage, its category is social practices, rituals, and festive events. So name of the element is hugus. Part 1, consists the background information of the element, its type, the geographical location, and its related domains. So element logos is a worship rights type. So geographical location and range of the elements, it describes a place where intangible heritage is practiced, even including the extent of the practice in neighboring areas or places. The related domains of the Hogos is performing arts and traditional craftsmanship. The part 2 is a description of intangible cultural heritage. So letter A is a summary of the elements. So it consists of a description of the history of the practice, the occasion or the season, processes involved, procedures, beliefs associated, settings, aims, social functions, cultural meaning, and other pertinent data. So in the example, it includes the occasion, also includes the preparation and rehearsals as well as the Holy Saturday rehearsals. Preparation and rehearsal, it includes the preparatory activities that are being done before the performance, while the Holy Saturday rehearsal, it includes the finalizations of the music, costumes, setting of lights and sounds, as well as the preparations. Next is the actual Hogos. It encompasses of how and what time it is being held as well as the places where people should go. Next is the beliefs. It is where we can put why such practices, specifically the Hogos, is considered important and part of the people's faith. Next is the settings where we can put where the Hogos or where such elements is being held or performed, including the places where is it being performed. So next is the aims, where we can put what's this practice aimed for. Part B is a culture, barriers, and practitioners of the element. So it is where the description of persons or people practicing the intangible heritage. So there it is being put up the people who's behind the element logos. We can put their names, age, as well as their contributions. So next is the part C, mode of transmission. It is describe how the knowledge and skills related to the element is passed on.
In the next part, which we will see the list of the significant tangible and movable heritage used associated with the elements. For example, carrozas, which is produced in 1940s, cart to bear with the sculptured images. Gusan, which is also produced in 2005, which is decorated with cloth, can be hoisted down for the main angel. Musical scores. The original copies done in the around year 1950s and the photocopies done around 2000. Costumes of angels produced and fabricated each year, many recycled and refit every performance to the fit of the new set of angel. 3 stages of choruses, and it is constructed yearly. It is staging areas for the chorus of the angel. 2 main wooden sculpture of Risen Christ and Mother Dolorosa. Keep with the local in Gargados, it is image of Christ and the Blessed Mother. The third part, which we can see the stories, narrative associated with elements. One of the major narratives derived from the research is the original composer, which was the most prolific and versatile composer. The fourth part is the significance, which we can see the importance of this cultural mapping and the reason, purpose of this cultural mapping. The fifth part is the assessment of practice, which we has a 3-part. And the first part is letter A, stated the condition, status of the practice. It is stated the status of the sculptor if it is still alive or they keep the practice since then. For example, due to the presence of musical scores, leaders who are linked to the traditional practice to the very source of the 19th century, the practice has kept its integrity. The letter B, the constraint, threats, issues, challenges, and the reason for these conditions or status. For example, a major threat might be if its present musical leaders fail to train a new generation of musical and scenic artists ready and empowered to continue the legacy. It stated that the issue and threats of the certain culture if those leaders would fail in maintaining the practice of the culture. Letter C. Measures and description of safeguarding measures taken. This part is how we can maintain the practice and also do some enhancement for the sake of new generation, for them to know that the certain culture has been derived 2 generations. Then the sixth part is the reference, which we can see some supporting documentations, key informants, and reference and other resources where they can get the certain information.